Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And today we'll be concluding our two-part series on Sandra Sollie's case. Last week, we discussed what happened between the day Sandra went missing up to around the 1-year anniversary of her disappearance, and we left you on a bit of a cliffhanger. Today, we'll be giving you a quick recap to bring you back up to speed, talk about what transpired on and around the 1-year anniversary, divulging some very interesting details that came to light as the years went on, and of course, we'll end the episode by discussing theories. So with that, let's dive in. Today's case is part 2 of the disappearance of Sandra Sollie. Okay, so last week we ended the episode on quite the cliffhanger, and I'm going to apologize in advance because we won't be starting this episode off by discussing the details of that bombshell I left you with. We will get to it by the end of the episode, don't worry, but seeing as it's been 2 weeks since part 1 went live, I do want to give all of our listeners, and John, a brief synopsis of what we discussed in part 1, and from there we'll keep going with the timeline of events. If you feel like you have a good grasp on what we talked about last week and don't need a refresher, feel free to jump ahead to about the 7-minute and 30-second mark. So we learned a lot about Sandra in our last episode. We found out that she was 7.5 months pregnant, divorced from a man named Ralph Sollie Jr., and she'd been out of work at her job at Eastman Kodak Company due to a head injury and severe headaches. She lived in a duplex by herself on State Route 350 in Macedon, New York, and we also learned she had a fair amount of friends in the Macedon area, and ever since falling pregnant, Sandra's family stated that she'd become a new person and was incredibly excited about the birth of her firstborn son, whom she'd already named Brandon Michael. But after 2:30 p.m. on May 23, 1994, Sandra Sollie was never seen or heard from again. The last sighting of Sandra, according to media reports at the time, was at her home in Macedon. It's unclear exactly who saw her or what witness statements helped authorities nail down this time frame, but based on most accounts of this case, that was the last time anyone had seen her. We also talked about the fact that at some point on the morning of the 23rd, Sandra had made a phone call to her friend Sandy. The two chatted for a bit, and Sandra told her friend that she would call her back later that night. Also at some point that day, Sandra had run a few errands with an elderly friend of hers named Ed. But after her errands, Sandra never made that call back to Sandy as she said she would, and she hasn't been seen or heard from again. As we continued on in the story in part 1, we learned that Sandra's landlord, a man named Jay, had been the first person to contact police when she'd missed her June rent payment, and didn't contact Jay about it, which was completely out of character for her. We later find out that she had not reached out to any friends or family, and had missed 2 prenatal doctor's appointments since the 23rd. So after Jay contacted authorities, he and the chief of the Macedon police at the time, John Ellis, had gone to her apartment on June 2nd, which was about 9 days after we found out she had been last seen, and they went there to check on her. They discovered that Sandra, her dog, a poodle named Jessie, and her purse were missing, but nothing was amiss in her apartment that would lead authorities to believe something had happened to her there, and her car was sitting seemingly untouched in her driveway. A few days later, Sandra was officially reported missing, and intense search efforts took place all around the Macedon area, with the investigation and searches originally being headed up by the Macedon PD, but they did call in the state police so they could get involved pretty much from the very beginning. The Erie Canal was also thoroughly searched during the first year since Sandra had vanished, and numerous tips and leads had been looked into, including a lead that stemmed from Sandra's credit cards being used by several different people in multiple locations across the state of New York. After a while, though, the search efforts as well as tips and leads began to slow, and not much new information came to light. And as we also talked about in our last episode, the public's attention was instead hyper-fixated on the case of a 5-year-old missing girl, Callie Poulton. Sandra's friends and family did all they could to bring attention back to her case, but they could only do so much. Over time, details did come to light in regards to some items that had been found in those searches police had conducted during the first few months after Sandra disappeared. Several of her personal belongings were said to have been found at a car wash in the Penfield area, and her wallet being discovered as well, which we learned was found in a row of bushes in Rochester. And that was where that lead that I previously mentioned regarding the individuals who had used her credit cards after she disappeared had stemmed from. Those people were eventually ruled out as having any involvement in the case, though. Another lead that authorities looked into was if there was any connection to the murder of Sandra's ex-sister-in-law, Vicki Sollie, and her boyfriend, Richard Snyder. But authorities ruled out any connection to that crime very quickly. Investigators did end up later confirming what they thought had taken place the day that Sandra went missing, with one officer stating for the press, quote, "We're definitely under the impression that she left the residence with somebody she knew. She would not usually take her dog unless she knew the person that she went with," end quote. And we discussed this in part 1 as well, how Sandra's dog, Jessie, wasn't particularly friendly with strangers. And because her dog was missing, that was a big indicator for authorities as to why they believed she'd gone somewhere with someone she was familiar with. By the 1-year anniversary, investigators were convinced that Sandra had met with foul play, but their case had gone ice cold, with barely any leads coming in for months. Regardless of how slow things were going, the lead investigator at the time with the state police, William Bowling, had still continued to do all he could to try and locate Sandra and her missing dog. He would also regularly check unidentified does across the country, as they did have Sandra's dental records to compare to any remains found. And that's pretty much where we ended our last episode, with the 1-year anniversary approaching and with a bunch of questions about who Sandra was last seen with and who the father of her unborn baby might have been. And as stated at the end of part 1, there was heavy speculation that the answer to those two questions could have been the same person, Sandra's ex-husband, Ralph Sollie Jr.
I'm glad you went over that because there was a lot of stuff that I had forgotten.
Okay, good, I'm glad.
Do you have a general place where you want to begin the story again, or are we just going to dive into things that we've already talked about?
Yeah, so we're going to just kind of continue in with the timeline of events. It's going to be all new information now. You guys have a pretty good synopsis of what we talked about in part 1, and like I said, we're not going to dive right into those details about Ralph yet. That will be more towards the end of the episode and as we start to discuss theories. So we'll just start right around the 1-year anniversary.
Okay.
So as I just mentioned, authorities were practically at a standstill with no new leads coming in for quite some time. Due to their lack of information, they, and I do also believe the family, got in contact with psychics to see if they could gather additional details that may move the case forward. But based on my research, it doesn't appear as though any consultations with said psychics were particularly fruitful. By December of 1995, Sandra's family was working to handle her estate, but were unable to have her declared legally deceased as she had not been missing for 3 years at that point. More than anything, they just wanted to know where her remains were located, as they and authorities believed her to be deceased and they wanted to provide her with a proper burial. But I did want to bring up the fact that they were working on her estate so early on, before they would have been able to declare her legally deceased, specifically because of this one comment I read in a piece in the Democrat and Chronicle that stated, quote, "Paralegal Renee Henry of the law office of Anthony Herrera of Batavia said appointing Cervone administrator of the estate will allow the family to dispose of Sollie's automobile and prohibit Sollie's ex-husband Ralph from claiming any of her assets," end quote. Now, I'm not quite sure why they were concerned about Ralph attempting to take any of Sandra's assets, and there weren't many other details on that publicized, but it is something to note and keep in the back of your head nonetheless.
I mean, I would assume it's because they had a bad feeling about him and his potential involvement.
It's possible.
So they wanted to remove any connection that he had to those belongings.
I mean, that would make sense. Yeah, it just was never flat out stated that way. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to infer that.
Yeah, I'd say so. Also, after the year anniversary had passed, the Cervones had attempted to get Sandra's case featured on several television shows, such as America's Most Wanted and Unsolved Mysteries, but both shows ended up stating that they were, quote, not interested in her story.
There was another case that we had where Unsolved Mysteries wouldn't take it on, too.
Was it Tracy Crow?
I don't remember.
There's a lot, actually, that people have reached out to Unsolved Mysteries specifically, and they've turned them down.
I think we talked about this before, where it's like, well, what are the criteria to be accepted, because there's some questionable stuff on Unsolved Mysteries.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's friggin' alien sightings on Unsolved Mysteries, but you don't want to do, a missing persons case or a murder mystery type thing.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Tracy Crowe, because early on in that investigation, there was like nothing to go off of.
Yeah.
And then obviously in more recent years, there was so much that came out about potential involvement of other people, but it just seemed as though, and I think you said this too, like, how much of a show are you going to get out of something?
Yeah.
Can you get a full hour long or like 45-minute long episode where there's not a ton that's happened? Whereas you look at Judy Smith's case and, she goes missing in Philadelphia and then her remains are found in North Carolina, and there were so many things that happened, and Unsolved Mysteries took on her case.
Yeah, I guess I was a little wrong in saying, can you get a full episode out of it? Because aren't some Unsolved Mystery episodes like little snippets of stories, like 5 or 10 minutes a piece?
Yes, so, and that was actually Gary Grant Jr.'s case, I remember, was one like that.
Yeah, so you don't need a ton of information to make, 5 to 10 minute little clip in it. So
I agree, yeah.
Again, I wonder what the criteria is to be selected for the show.
I would like to know. Now, at this point is when we start to learn some new details about the quote-unquote personal belongings of Sandra's that had been found at that car wash in Penfield. We knew there had been some things found there, but it was unclear what they were, other than that specific terminology used by investigators of personal belongings. Well, come to find out, the items located at the car wash were Sandra's purse, as well as her dog Jessie's collar and tags. Authorities did also later end up mentioning to the press that they believed whoever had been involved in Sandra's disappearance had gone to this car wash where the purse and dog tags were found and could have possibly used said car wash to clean up evidence in their vehicle, rather than this just being a dump site for some of Sandra's items.
That's pretty stupid to clean up evidence and then dump and leave evidence there, though.
I agree, yeah. And just to give you like a little bit more detail on where these things were found at the car wash, I'm pretty sure Sandra's purse was said to be found in a dumpster, and it was stated in the press that the dog's collar had been located in a garbage can that was right next to where a rug cleaning machine was situated. Now, I don't know if said dumpster and trash can were one and the same or two different ones on the property, but either way, it appeared to be very possible that because at least one of the trash cans was next to this rug cleaning machine, that this was kind of why authorities were speculating that the perp actually utilized the car wash and may have even used the rug cleaner to possibly wash the carpeting in their vehicle.
Yeah, I think all of that makes sense. It's just, I find it stupid that somebody would clean their car using like the rug cleaner or whatever and then dump the stuff
at the same place.
And those are items that, can be traced back to somebody.
Yes, but here's the other thing, and I wanted to bring this up because I think the whole situation with the car wash is significant, and I think it's more significant regarding two things. One, the direction in which this person traveled, and two, the wallet. So I'm pretty sure last episode we talked about how the individual, whatever it is that they did, they were driving westward, away from Macedon, and then the car wash was the first destination, and then Rochester, where the wallet was found, was the second destination, right?
So you think they took the wallet out of the purse, threw the purse in the trash?
So that's the thing, because if you remove somebody's wallet...
How are you going to know whose it is?
Exactly. Of course, the dog tags are a different story.
I wonder if they found the dog tags, and then once finding the dog tags, then they started going through the dumpster and then found the purse, and they were like, oh, this was her purse.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm thinking, but also
what was the key factor in them finding anything at the
car wash
in the first place?
Yeah, I don't know if there was like a tip or something that came in to say, oh, I saw someone throwing things away here, maybe you should check it out, or who knows. But just thinking about it, it's like, okay, so you're starting off in Macedon, and then you're driving around 13 miles or a 20-minute drive west. You stop at this car wash in a totally different town. Right? So you're leaving two items there. Then you drive another 8 miles or 11 minutes to Rochester. And what, you think, they toss the wallet into a bunch of bushes, like as the car is just driving by, like don't even actually stop, and they just like toss it out?
Yeah.
So as I'm thinking about this, I'm just developing all these questions in my head. Are these places significant? Why the car wash? Why Rochester? Did this person frequent these areas often? Did they just happen upon them as they just drove west out of Macedon? I mean, you have to assume authorities think that this is someone she knew.
I think that people, after they commit crimes, or if they're involved in some type of, shady business, they're going to want to go to places that they're at least relatively familiar with.
True.
I'm just wondering, were they tracking a suspect and maybe somebody gave a tip about a suspect or something? How would they end up at this car wash in the first place? That's my biggest question.
Yeah, and they were there early on.
Right. Were they looking for a particular person and, they were asking, have you seen this person around here? And then somebody finally said yes. So then they're like, okay, now we're going to look through the trash and stuff, because I doubt that they're going to every freaking, business along a route and looking through the trash to find stuff.
Not.
So
of course not.
What was it that got them there in the first place?
And also, was it before or after the situation with the credit cards? Because we know that the credit cards had been used between like the 26th and the 31st, I believe, of May. But she wasn't even reported missing until the first week in June.
I feel like they had to be tracking somebody.
They had to be, but who?
I mean,
that's the ultimate question,
right,
of course.
That's the ultimate question. I mean, I already have a general idea of who I think.
Yeah.
Like, it's just the small amount of information that we have regarding her head injury and the potential of, who may be the father and all that. It's like, come on, who do you think it probably is based on who we've talked about so far?
I mean, that's always the general consensus, It's like,
yeah,
that's who people go for in the first place, and it's why it's usually, I don't know the statistic on it, but it seems like it's got
to be a high percentage.
Exactly.
So I'm thinking that, let's say Ralph was involved. Maybe they were tracking him.
Yep.
They found out that he was going along this route, maybe that he stopped at this place. They looked through the trash, whatever, but they haven't gotten enough to connect him in total. Or if it was another suspect and not Ralph, maybe they were tracking that suspect. They got to here. They found this property that belonged to Sandra, and then they kind of just continued from there.
Yeah.
But it just seems too out of the blue to randomly find these belongings at this car wash. Why? How?
Yeah, I think that's the thing that sticks out to me the most, is the fact that it's the purse and the dog's collar and tags at this car wash. The whole thing in Rochester, like, that literally could just be someone driving along and tossing something out of the vehicle, versus this was almost deliberately placed here.
I mean, either that, or you could have had somebody that was dumpster diving and saw that the purse was thrown into the dumpster and they took the wallet, and then they were on their way to Rochester and just took it.
Yeah, but
it was found in the bushes, you're saying, right?
The 9-year-old found it. None of the cards had been used, and then they gave it to a parent.
Maybe there was cash in there.
Maybe. I don't know. I just find it to be weird.
I agree.
The whole thing with the car wash throws me. But all right, let's keep going. Sometime in mid to late 1996, a new team of investigators with the State Police Violent Crime Interdiction Team became involved to re-review Sandra's case, and they had all new detectives look at it so there would be a full, fresh set of eyes that had never seen it before. One of those investigators, Lieutenant Mark Fisher of the VCI team, stated, quote, "Of course the Sollie case was never closed. It's just that we thought it deserved another, closer look," end quote. One of the first orders of business for this team, other than, of course, familiarizing themselves with the case, was to re-interview over 100 people. But as per usual, they didn't want to say much else that was going on behind the scenes. But I did find an odd report that there had apparently been a sighting of Sandra around September or October of 1996, and it was stated that a woman matching her description was seen in a neighborhood nearby to where she used to live. But it's completely unclear how verifiable that sighting was, and I have to think, just based on what we know now, that she's literally never been seen or heard from again, that it probably wasn't her. But I just thought it was interesting and something to note.
Yeah, I mean, unless she had this whole, secret life going where, she was super happy now that she was going to have the baby, and she found somebody to run away with, and maybe she had problems that she wanted to get away from that not many people knew about, but I mean, it said that she was kind of a homebody, had friends, but, wasn't super outgoing to be out in the public all the time.
Yeah. And she had a nursery set up in her apartment too. Like, you would think if she's going to run away, she wouldn't have prepared her home for this new child.
Yeah, exactly. So it would be pretty low on my list that she ran away with somebody and just started a new life somewhere.
I totally agree.
Because if she lives alone and nobody else would be in that apartment. It's not like she was putting together the nursery to fool somebody into thinking that she was going to be staying and like setting up, this 4D chess thing so nobody knew where she was going.
Yeah, exactly. Now, a little bit before those sightings came in, back in August of 1996, so this was just over 2 years since both Sandra and Callie Poulton went missing, there was a massive development in the Poulton case. Her body was found and her killer was identified. Come to find out, a neighbor of Callie's named Mark Christie had abducted and killed her and placed her body in a 300,000-gallon tank at Nortel Company where he worked as a security guard. After an argument with his wife where he told her what happened and then she subsequently called 911 about his confession, police got involved in attempting to get the truth from Christie. Utilizing impressive interrogation tactics, authorities were able to get him to confess to the crime and they located Callie's body and she was properly put to rest. Mark was charged and convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. As more and more details came out in Callie's case, though, there was, yet again, a ton of media coverage. And one man, a private investigator named Richard Ingraham, who at the time worked mostly on attempting to locate missing people, had become interested in Sandra's case. Now, Ingraham had been a licensed PI since 1979 and had plenty of expertise in the field, previously working security and as a corrections officer in the past, and, of course, his current work as a PI locating missing people. Now, the reason he became particularly enamored with the case was after a ceremony for Callie. Richard told the Democrat and Chronicle of that experience, quote, "The night of the ceremony for Callie, I was thinking about Sandra Sollie. Even though their backgrounds aren't the same and she's not a child, I thought it was sad people weren't reaching out to her family," end quote. And he later told the same publication in 1998, quote, "We got to saying, it's too bad about Sandra Sollie. She's an adult and the public in general doesn't seem as concerned. I started feeling real sad about that. I really felt a need to reach out to them," end quote. And that's exactly what he did. He reached out to Sandra's family and offered his services for just $1. The family accepted his offer and he's literally been working on the case ever since. And at this point, that's going on 29 years and I think he's in his late 80s, but he does not give up trying. But back in 96, after the family accepted his help, Ingraham immediately began working on the case. He was interviewing individuals close to Sandra, reviewing any documents he could get his hands on, and would routinely go to the West Wayne Plaza, one of the last places Sandra was seen alive, so he could pass out flyers to keep her case in the public eye. He also developed what I understand as a very cordial and professional relationship with the state police. It appears as though they've worked relatively well together over the years. As time went on, Ingraham has said that he's gotten some sort of an idea of what he believes happened. But how I understand it, there just wasn't enough information to confirm anything or bring forward any charges. Authorities, on the other hand, haven't come out with as strong of an opinion regarding if they know what happened, but they have said they do believe Sandra was the victim of a homicide and have a few suspects that they haven't been able to rule out.
So did Ingraham publicize his opinion?
Not quite, but let me read this quote for you. So in 2002, it seemed like he had kind of gotten down to the bottom of what he believed happened, and the Democrat and Chronicle reported, quote, "Ingraham believes that Sollie is dead, and he is confident he knows who is responsible, but he has no physical evidence. So he is hoping someone close to the suspect with knowledge of the person's guilt will come forward. I personally don't know how the person that did it or that has knowledge of it could sleep at night. They must have ice water for blood," he said, end quote.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't really tell you too much.
Unfortunately not, no.
It gives everybody, slight, confirmational bias that, okay, it does seem like she was the victim of a homicide. Somebody did kill her, but we don't know who.
Exactly. But with that comment, it also makes you think that he believes someone else has probably direct knowledge of the crime and isn't saying something.
Yeah, he may not know that for 100%.
Yeah.
But I'm sure this other person must have had close people to them and maybe has said something in passing at some point or another.
Yeah.
Or maybe after they did it, they ran to this other person and, needed help, needed to clean up, needed whatever. And maybe it was just never spoken between the two what happened, but even that could be evidence. It's like, oh no, on this day and time, so-and-so came to my house, they're drenched in blood and they needed to shower.
Yeah.
We never asked any questions about it. I don't know anything about it, but that could be enough to tie
this
potential suspect to the murder.
Absolutely. All right, so now's about the time where I want to begin discussing the big old bombshell we learned about at the end of part 1. This information came to light publicly in 2008, that it was possible that Sandra's unborn child's father had been her ex-husband. So I do want to discuss all that we find out about Ralph Sollie Jr. over the years and kind of what happened from early on in the investigation with him to more recently. And after that, we'll move on to theories. First and foremost, I want to read this statement for you from the Pocono Record regarding the possibility that Ralph Sollie was Sandra's child's father. And this is just, to reiterate what was said to the public around the time in 2008 when, obviously everyone was made aware. It states, quote, Donna Neth, Servone Sollie's older sister, said Sandra and Ralph Sollie had gotten a divorce and he had remarried. However, the two were having an affair, she claimed. According to Neth, her little sister was pregnant with Sollie's child, though that was never confirmed, end quote. So you might be wondering why he and Sandra got divorced for him to potentially go back and have an affair with her 4 years after their split. Mm-hmm. Well, from what I understand, Ralph originally had an affair on Sandra with her hairdresser, which is quite a low blow. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, if he's having one affair, wouldn't surprise me if he had another.
Right. It's kind of like once a cheater, always a cheater.
Yeah. But back during the first months and years after Sandra had gone missing, there were some comments about her supposedly having plans to see or have some sort of visit with her ex-husband on the day she was last seen.
Interesting.
Right?
The plot thickens.
It does. We know everything that she had done during the day up until about that 2:30 p.m. time frame, but it's unclear if anyone had seen her after that, who the witnesses were that saw her in the first place to give that last sighting at 2:30, and if anyone said that they saw her with Ralph or with a man or anything like that. But there were some details regarding the fact that Sandra may have been with Ralph the morning of the 23rd, and she wasn't planning to see him in the afternoon. And if that's the case, that kind of screws with the whole timeline. I don't know what's true, though.
Do you think that Sandra would have confided in her friend that she talked to about the meeting?
That's what I was just going to say, actually. So I'm curious if Sandy, who she talked to that morning, knew anything about this potential meetup. Did she say, oh, me and Ralph already met up this morning and blah, blah, blah happened? Or did she say, oh, me and Ralph are supposed to meet up later on this afternoon to talk about this?
Or was this a hush-hush type thing where Sandra knew that Sandy didn't like Ralph being around and she would have, cussed her out for meeting up with him, so she didn't say anything?
Yeah, who knows?
I think it could go either way, that they could have met in the morning or later that day, because maybe they met in the morning and things didn't go well. So then Ralph came back later and met up with her again that night.
Possible.
Or maybe they just met at night and things didn't go well.
All are very possible. And I feel like you're probably curious what the meeting was about in general, because if they're meeting up, if it's not some sort of tryst,
I'd assume it would have to be to talk about the kid.
No, actually. It was supposedly about her car, because it was still in her ex-husband's name. And I think this goes back to that comment I told you earlier to keep in the back of your head, that it was something good to note, the fact that her family was trying to handle her estate in late 95, and that comment about Ralph not getting any of her assets. One of those assets that he technically owned was the car.
Yeah, but say this whole affair was taboo to all of Sandra's friends and family.
Yeah.
What's a perfect thing that she could say to them to get them off her back about meeting up with Ralph? It's like, no, I need to meet up with Ralph to talk about the car.
Very true.
But maybe it really wasn't about the car, and maybe it was about the baby, if he was the father. If he remarried and, he's with this other lady, I don't know, if he's having an affair, I guess he doesn't really care that much anyway, but I'm sure if he's remarried to this new woman, I'm sure she wouldn't be too happy about him having another child with his ex.
I wouldn't think so. Absolutely not. And this is also something that I feel like kind of coincides what you were just saying too, is this could be like the story that they're both telling people, right? And he did give a comment at one point to the press, even though there were a lot of times that he declined comments. But there is this one piece in the Democrat and Chronicle that states, quote, Ralph Sollie said he last saw his ex-wife the morning of the day she disappeared, when they talked about her car. As part of the divorce settlement, he's required to pay for the car, to which he still holds title, end quote. So that could still, again, be like the official story. Like, this is what we're going to say the conversation was about.
Right.
But in reality, like you said, could the conversation have been about the baby?
Right. But that also kind of covers his ass.
Correct.
Because he's like, yeah, I was with her. But I was with her in the morning to talk about the car.
Exactly.
And then, like I said, maybe things didn't go well. And then maybe he came back later on in the day.
Yes. But regardless, early on in the investigation, it was stated that Ralph was cooperative. But by the time investigators had invited him back for a third interview, he retained a lawyer and declined taking a polygraph, which, I mean, I don't blame him. At that point, if authorities have brought him in 3 separate times to talk to them, he's probably thinking that they're thinking he could be involved. So of course he's going to get a lawyer. Of course he's going to decline a polygraph. That just makes sense to me.
Right, even if he's innocent, because
correct.
The more times you're getting called in, the more times you're getting questioned. What if they're trying to build a case against you? And even if you are innocent, you don't want to give them any more ammunition to potentially arrest you.
Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law.
Exactly.
But at one point, the Democrat and Chronicle had attempted to get in touch with Ralph for an interview rather than just like a comment, to which he declined. But the author of this piece stated, quote, his attorney, Ronald Valentine, said he believes his client is simply tired of being questioned. He did cooperate with them, gave them access to everything, Valentine said. They simply had nothing to indicate there was any wrongdoing on his part, end quote. And in regards to, access to everything, there were reports that Ralph had provided authorities with bank and phone records that supposedly showed where he was on the day Sandra disappeared. And there had been one other comment that I found from Ralph that was reported pretty early on, and he had stated, quote, I feel good about where I stand in this. It's a bad situation because there aren't any facts, just rumor and speculation, end quote. And I think that was after he gave, I guess according to him, it would be like his quote-unquote alibi.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm thinking back to Ingraham and his statement. I'm wondering if he thinks that Ralph is involved in this, if Ralph had an accomplice to use the phone or to purchase things at a certain place at a certain time to give him an alibi. Yeah,
there's no like surveillance footage of him at a store or something to show.
Yeah, so.
Which, I mean, I think with any case, it can kind of go like that, especially with older ones.
Yeah, I mean, you still have reasonable doubt, though.
Of course.
It's like, okay, so.
Who knows?
Who was there? Who could have been there?
Yeah, I mean, you don't really know at the end of the day who used his bank card, if it was like a banking verification that like he purchased something however many miles away.
Or if he took money out at like an ATM or something and somebody else actually took the money out. I mean,
but like, wouldn't you think they would go and look at the footage and confirm that it was him? Because I'm pretty sure they had cameras.
Yeah.
But,
I don't know.
I mean, all good points to make. But before we move forward, I did actually just want to back up for a quick second and go back to this whole potential meetup on the 23rd. And there's something that I find really odd about this, and I think it might throw a wrench in things for you, John. It's definitely thrown a wrench in things for me because I'm just so lost on this. But apparently Ralph and his new wife had just had a baby of their own 5 days prior to when Sandra went missing. So the baby was born on May 18th.
Okay.
And then Sandra went missing on the 23rd.
Why do you think that's a wrench? Like a wrench to say Ralph wasn't involved?
Well, so that's the thing. It's like when you have a baby, if she had a hospital birth, she's going to be in there for probably a couple days. So she's only been home with their newborn child for a day or two at this point. And he's just like, hey, yeah, I got to go see my ex-wife. Like, I would be pissed.
Obviously.
I would be like, no, you are going to be here. I am sleep deprived. We have a crying, hungry newborn. I do not want you to leave this house right now.
Yeah.
Like.
So how often had Ralph and Sandra been meeting up or talking about the car?
I have no idea. It was the only meeting that I'd ever heard of.
So imagine this. Maybe they had made this meeting about the car or whatever. They said they're going to meet up on this day, whatever. So Ralph goes there And maybe he didn't even know that she was pregnant, and then she just drops that bomb on him that day. And he's like, I had no idea. They had an affair, however long ago.
7.5 months ago, yeah.
Right, maybe it wasn't like super current. Maybe they had an affair back then. He has no idea. He's got a newborn baby now. He goes to see his ex-wife, and his ex-wife's like, hey, you know that affair we had? I'm pregnant with your baby. And maybe he didn't even know.
I mean, that's definitely possible. That's a good point to bring up. I did not even think of that.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the other thing. So, right, we know that authorities had stated that they could not rule out Ralph as a suspect. We talked about that at the end of part 1. And if that's the case, and they think it's possible that he could have been involved, you now have to think about this whole scenario, right? You've got Sandra and Jesse never being found again. So where are their bodies? What happened to them? You have to think about this whole route that he could have potentially taken, if police are thinking that it's him.
Where was he living?
In Macedon.
Okay.
So he would have to leave his new wife with their new baby for hours and hours and hours on end to potentially get rid of bodies, get rid of belongings, clean the car, do all these other things.
Unless he had somebody help him.
But again, that could literally be anyone too. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's him. It's just one of those things where if this is who you're looking at, knowing that police were interested enough in him to bring him in multiple times, they wanted him to take a polygraph, in their head they have to be thinking, this is how things went down.
Yeah, but it just popped into my head too. If they're saying that they can't rule him out, and, Ralph was saying that he had these phone records or these bank records and stuff that show that he wasn't there, clearly they don't totally prove that he was wherever he was if they can't rule him out as a suspect.
So that's what I would think too. Now, I'm going to completely flip everything on its head for you right now because I am so confused, and I'm sure you're going to be, whether or not Ralph is actually a suspect or ever has been a suspect.
Well, if they're saying that they can't rule him out, I would assume that he has to be a suspect.
Well, hey.
Or a person of interest.
Hold on a second, because there are numerous comments I'm going to read for you real quick. So the first one came from investigator Bowling, who, mind you, at the time of this comment, was no longer officially working the case, but he told the Democrat and Chronicle in 98, quote, Sandra Sollie's ex-husband Ralph remains a suspect because, on the advice of his attorney, he has never talked with state police, end quote. So he was a state police investigator. You're probably thinking that because they didn't talk to him, they can't rule him out. That would make sense.
So is he implying that he's still a suspect because he hasn't talked to the state police, but maybe he's not a suspect for like local police because they've already ruled him out? But state police hasn't ruled him out because they haven't talked to him?
That I'm not 100% sure on. But then there's another comment in that same piece, and it states, quote, Dan Martin of the Violent Crime Investigation Team confirms that Ralph Sollie Jr. has not been eliminated as a suspect, but neither have several other people, he says, end quote. And then you have even more added on to this, where the PI at one point had stated for the media, quote, I have a rule. Always look at the in-laws before you look at the outlaws in a case like this. It's always someone close, end quote. So like the fact that he's saying in-laws makes me like, is he insinuating something here?
I don't know. I'm just wondering, are you giving me this information to try and get me away from Ralph? Or to stick with Ralph?
So I wanted to tell you.
All right.
I wanted to tell you that there are all these comments that show
that Ralph is a suspect.
Correct. But then there are more. Recent years, 2007, for example, we have comments like this from state police investigator Tom Crowley, who stated, quote, there's no one suspect in this investigation. There's a lot of theories as to what happened to Sandra, and the fact is, we don't know for sure. There's a lot of people we'd like to sit down with and talk to that we hope can shed some light on things, end quote. But then the most confusing of them all, this one came from the Pocono Record and Detective Barry Chase, who stated, quote, obviously, he, along with several other people, were interviewed regarding this, Chase said. I know there has always been some speculation, but he was never a suspect, end quote.
What?
So, like, I'm sorry, but what? Like, was he mad that, like, previous investigators said he was a suspect and, like, he didn't want the public to know that, so he's trying to, like, backtrack? So that's what I mean. Like,
it's a total contradiction. That's stupid.
I know. Like, you look back, there are newspaper archives, folks. Like, you can look back and see all the comments that early investigators told the press, and they're all saying, oh, he hasn't been ruled out. Yes, he's a suspect. We can't rule him out. So it's one of those things where you're like, who's right? But then you have, a more recent comment that says, no, he's not a suspect.
I don't know. You had everybody that was in the thick of it pretty much saying that he was a suspect.
Correct.
And then you have the private investigator who has his own idea of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why they would always be like, oh, no, we can't rule him out as a suspect. Can't rule him out as a suspect.
Mm-hmm.
Got to look at the in-laws before you look at the outlaws. And then randomly this guy, 15 years later?
It's like, nah.
Or so is like, no, he was never a suspect. Okay, at some point he was probably a person of interest and close to a suspect.
Mm-hmm.
But
especially if they said it. Like, why would you say that to the press? And why would multiple people say that to the press over and over again for one person to then be like, no. Why are you thinking that? That's crazy. He was never a suspect.
Is Ralph still alive?
No. I believe he passed away in 2021.
Okay, so that statement came out when? 2007?
Correct. Yep. So years before he died.
I don't know. Then who else? Like, name another suspect then.
That's
or
what I want to know.
Name the people that you want to talk to.
Exactly. And there's nobody else that I've ever seen mentioned by name.
Did they ever talk to Ralph's new wife that he was having the baby with? Or that he had the baby with?
I would assume so, but it was never reported that there were like interviews with her or anything. But now there's actually interesting information that came out in 2016, so relatively recently. And I feel like the fact that this happened might make you believe more of what the early investigation stated. So there were reports that authorities were searching a property located on Weidrick Road in Macedon. And I want you to take a wild guess as to who that property used to belong to.
Dr. Seuss.
Correct. No. Ralph Sollie Jr., correct. It was reported that he never gave police permission to search the property back when Sandra first went missing, and for the years afterwards that he still owned the property. Having said that, in 2016, there were new owners, and they did give investigators permission to conduct a search. So if police in 2016 want to look at his property, you have to think they still have some sort of little bee in their bonnet to say, maybe he could have been involved. Why would they want to search his property if that's the case?
I don't know. I'm of the opinion that you should probably disregard the 2007 statement saying that he was never a suspect.
Yeah, it's weird.
I mean, 9 years later, you go into the guy's old property to search it. I think he's probably still a suspect, just as all of the previous statements before had said.
But now I want to read a comment for you from a state trooper in 2016 that I believe was, asked for comment by a reporter that was like, hey, you guys are searching this property. Tell me more. And this just threw me. Like, I think this is the one thing that has thrown me the most in this case. It says, quote, there wasn't anything in particular that led us out here other than this is where she was last seen before she went missing.
What?
End quote. Right? Wasn't she last seen at her house?
Yeah.
Not at her ex-husband's property?
So was her ex-husband, was Ralph living there at the time of her disappearance?
I believe so, yeah.
I wonder who saw her there then.
That's what I want to know. And why is that the first time coming out? And did that trooper accidentally say something he shouldn't have said?
I don't know.
'Cause that's the only comment I've ever seen anywhere about her being last seen somewhere other than her own home or that plaza.
But what's strange is unless she was brought there by a friend or walked there, which I doubt she did.
No.
Like her car's at her apartment. She has her dog. How did she get there? I doubt Ralph brought her back to the house to talk to
where his wife is with their newborn child.
Right, unless they're still in the hospital.
Possible that the wife is still in the hospital and he's
With
like
the
back
baby.
home taking care of household stuff, whatever. That's
and
possible
maybe a
too.
neighbor saw.
Maybe.
I don't know. That's a bigger bombshell than
him being
finding
the father.
out that him potentially being the father. Yeah.
I don't know, man. That one just, I don't know what to believe. Like that just totally.
I wonder if that trooper got in trouble.
I don't know. But anyway, investigators did search this property. They had 4 divers who searched a pond. There were foot searches conducted, and investigators brought 6 canine units and searched the woods behind the property with ATVs. And John, I actually want to send you a link to the Google Maps view of this property so you can see how incredibly rural this area is too.
Oh yeah, quite rural.
Quite. Like all those woods behind it, that's where they were searching. And it's weird. The whole situation is just weird to me. But the thing that sucks is that authorities found nothing. They found no new information that, could have led them really anywhere, at least that was reported publicly. Sandra wasn't found, and it doesn't appear as though they found any evidence of her having been there.
Nothing of the dog either?
No. And that's really the last bit of big news in the case for probably almost 7 years now, other than the fact that, like I just mentioned to you a few minutes ago, John, that Ralph Sollie Jr. passed away in 2021.
Mm-hmm. What did he do for work?
So in the obituary, it says he retired as president and CEO of Arrow Conveyor Equipment Incorporated.
Sounds like some type of industrial job.
Yeah.
Would he have had access to industrial equipment?
Possible.
If he was involved, could he have, disposed of a body a different way than, burying it on his own property?
Mm-hmm. As seeing as how she's never been found, too, so.
Yeah, didn't you say the other girl was found in a 300-gallon barrel?
300,000.
300,000-gallon barrel.
Correct. So I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of things that can kind of, go either way, but that's actually the last theory that I want to discuss. I have a few others I'd like to talk about first.
Okay.
So
one that I had thought of before I had asked you the question wasn't there a guy that she had met in a bar that was married and had a kid?
Oh, that was Callie Poulton's father.
Right. So that had nothing to do with it.
No,
we can
nothing.
rule that out.
Yep.
Whatever.
Police said that was just purely coincidental.
Yep. Outside of that, I had some questions that maybe we don't even know the answers to.
It's possible with this one.
When did she sustain the head injury? And were there any medical records of, what type of injury it was that she sustained? Was she struck with an object? Did she fall and hit her head? Did somebody punch her? That's good information to know because that could narrow it down to, was it an accident or did somebody attack her?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know anything about that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the time frame on that would be good too.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, she had been out of work for how long?
I'm not sure, but for a little while at least.
Yeah. So those are the big questions that I had because I thought that if we knew those answers, it may
at least point to
help build the timeline a little bit better.
Yeah, no, those are all good questions to ask. I wish we had the answers. I'm sure police have the
do,
answers.
right.
Yeah. So one of the first theories that I wanted to talk about is one that has, been discussed here and there by people online, but it was that she could have been potentially abducted and her unborn child stolen by another woman who wanted a child of her own.
Mm-hmm.
And we've heard horrifying stories of things like that happening before. Like, it's not like it's unheard of, but the biggest thing that deters me from this theory is why would she have gone with this person?
I guess another question that I had that could kind of go hand in hand with this is, did she walk her dog regularly?
Yes, she did.
So could she have been abducted while she was walking the dog?
It's possible. It totally is. But I don't know. Like, for me, I wouldn't be bringing my purse with me to walk the dog.
Yeah.
In this day and age, I'd bring my phone and a key. For her, probably just be her keys.
Yeah.
So that was a little odd to me.
Yeah, it seems like it's more likely that she would have taken her stuff and gotten in a car with someone.
Yeah, like if you're grabbing your purse, you're thinking you're going somewhere where you might need it.
Yeah, or you're just venturing away from the house. If you're going for a walk, it's more of like a athleisure activity where you won't need your purse for it. But if you're going out in somebody's car and going to another location, you probably want to bring your ID, your wallet, all that stuff. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And, with that whole thing too, of course there's the possibility that she got into a car with someone that she knew and that person wanted to steal her child, but,
tinfoil hat shit right there.
Yeah, it really is. And it's like if they stole her baby, they're not going to be sticking around the area. And like none of her close friends, at least that we know of, were ever said to have moved away. Like none of that just makes sense to me. So I feel like that's a theory that like, sure, it's a possibility, but is it
when you don't know what
probable?
the real answer is, anything is a possibility.
Of course, yeah. But how probable is it?
Right.
Is the real question.
Exactly.
Then, there's the other theory that she just unfortunately came across a perfect stranger who killed her and her dog while she was, along this walk. And they disposed of her body, the dog's body, took her belongings, just, this whole westward travel means nothing. And they just got rid of them wherever they felt like getting rid of them. Could have even been a serial killer for all we know. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. But, like, why are police so dead set on the fact that, like, she left with someone she knew? Why are they saying that?
Because of the dog.
Exactly. But then if she's walking the dog and she gets abducted, but then you would also think there probably would be someone that maybe saw or heard that.
Yeah.
There are no sightings.
Yeah, because if the dog doesn't like other people that it doesn't know, it's going to go ballistic as somebody tries to grab her owner.
I don't know. I think, again, it's not out of the realm of possibility. I think it's something that we would need to know more of what police have.
Yeah, who these other people are that are potential suspects. Like, okay, sure, we can say that Ralph is a suspect, but who are the other people that they want to talk to more? Like, they've never been named publicly. Are they really suspects, or are they just persons of interest? Because if they're suspects, they must have some type of link directly to a crime or an abduction or some link to Sandra in general and her disappearance. So, I mean, to say that you have multiple suspects, it also could be that if Ralph was involved, then he had some other people helping him, whether it was to dispose of the body or to clean the car or to take some of the belongings and, you know, leave a breadcrumb trail away from wherever things happened so it looks like that person traveled somewhere else.
I mean, again, all possible.
Right, and out of everything that we've learned, if you gather all that information up and you have to lean one way or the other, it's like, okay, well, most of the information that's out there has pointed towards Ralph potentially being involved. So that's really your most conclusive theory to continue going on. It's like you had all these investigators saying that he's not ruled out as a suspect. You have the private investigator saying that he's not ruled out as a suspect, and you have to look at the in-laws before you look at the outlaws.
It's
so
someone
that's pretty
close,
much,
exactly.
Right, that's pretty much somebody very close to her. And then outside of that one 2007 statement saying that he was never a suspect, which he was clearly a suspect at some point. People said that he was a suspect, so you can't just say something fresh, new now, that totally negates the past because the past happened.
Unless you're like clarifying and saying he was a suspect, he is no longer a suspect. Exactly.
Right.
That would
totally
be different. Yep.
Which makes me, now that you said that, that makes me disregard that 2007 statement even harder because if he did want to clarify, he should have said he's no longer a suspect.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that.
And then you have 2016.
They're searching
where they're
his property.
searching his freaking property.
Exactly.
There wasn't any information about them searching other people's properties. So, I mean, what conclusion can you really come to? That seems like investigators are leaning pretty heavily on him being involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So the only other theory really that I thought of was like, did she meet someone in a bar? How they were saying previously, oh, she used to meet people in bars all the time. Some people maybe didn't agree with that lifestyle. Did she meet someone there? And maybe they had a one-night stand. She got pregnant. And then like when her family was asking, she got nervous and wanted to tell them that it was like someone close to her who was really the father. I don't know what you think about that. I don't know how possible I think it is, but
I think it's possible.
Dang it with that word again.
There's just so much more that investigators have aimed towards Ralph.
Yeah, for
than
that
other
to be
people. Like, I'm sure you could meet an unsavory character at a bar and something could happen from there.
Yeah.
But there hasn't been much information released, let alone a name, as far as who else may have been involved. So I don't know if I have to lean one way. I have to say that because investigators are leaning so heavily towards Ralph, I would have to do the same. If some other bombshell information came out saying, you know, that she got picked up by a guy from the bar to go out on a date or something and then she disappeared.
That would be different for sure.
Because to go on to your point of, oh, it could have been a serial killer, could have been this, that. Like, people go looking for their victims in potentially vulnerable situations. If a girl's out at a bar getting intoxicated, but I doubt she was at 7.5 months pregnant, but if she's out wherever, they're kind of scanning and looking for their next victim, and maybe they had their eye on her, but again, what's the probability of that?
Agreed, yeah. And I just want to get your take then on the things that like threw me for a loop a little bit is, you know, first of all, the fact that his new wife literally had a baby 5 days before. I feel like that's pretty wild to then like potentially flip out in this way over your ex-wife's situation and go to that extreme. And
I think that's a, you know, heat of the moment thing.
I guess like crime of passion rather than
So
planned.
I mean, it is wild that she had just had a baby and everything, but if he didn't know that he was the father of Sandra's child, and then she just drops that on him 5 days after he had a baby with his new wife.
Now he's like, shit,
I could
I have
see him
2
snapping,
babies.
right?
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. I think your theory on him potentially not knowing about it changes my thoughts on that. Whereas like when I was researching this and, you know, coming up with things in my own head, that didn't come up for me. So now to know about it and have that thought just mulling around up here, I'm like, okay, well, maybe that makes more sense.
I mean, if you think about it, he seemed to be well off, right? He
owned
died as a president or retired as a president of some company.
Yeah.
So that would have been, child support that he'd be paying for the next 18 years to his ex-wife. And how would he explain that to his new wife and all this? Like you said, it could have been a crime of passion.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what else threw you for a loop that you want my take on?
The fact that the family has never said anything about him.
Especially after he died.
Yeah, I found it interesting. I mean, I can absolutely see why. Like, for me, I would never say anything.
I guess.
Unless, I knew for sure.
Sure. I mean, I wonder if, they were just scared to go public with everything, and that's why they ended up getting the private investigator, because maybe they were scared to say something publicly, but if they had somebody that was working on their behalf that, was going to do all the legwork on it, and they could at least talk and bounce ideas back and forth through him, and he could kind of, give confirmation or find evidence that would be contrary to their thoughts.
That's very possible, yeah. And then, another thing that had made me kind of question things was, like, why have an affair with your ex-wife? But like you were saying before, too, you kind of gave me a new perspective on it, where maybe this was just like a one-night tryst where maybe they were drunk and then, they didn't talk about it again. And then all of a sudden she's pregnant and maybe she didn't tell him.
Well, you also think, too, she was, 7.5 months pregnant? The wife just had the baby, so that was probably, his wife was probably, 10 weeks into pregnancy, maybe? And maybe he wasn't getting any action from his wife, who was pregnant and maybe sick all the time, so then he hit up his ex-wife, and then that whole affair happened because of that.
Which we know he's had an affair previously, so that doesn't surprise you. Right. Yeah, so I...
He's probably a deviant, because if he's cheating on all of his women, if he's not getting it from one of them, he's going to go to another one to get it.
Yeah. Well, I guess you've answered all my questions. Thank you.
Hey, no problem.
But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I just wish now at this point that someone would come forward and say something.
Yeah, definitely. Or police give a little bit more information about any other suspects. If they were to put somebody's name out publicly that's a potential suspect, maybe they would get more.
Other than, like, if they're saying, oh, he was and is still a suspect, but there are multiple people we would like to talk to more. Yeah. Put the heat on someone else. Don't even say that they're a suspect, just say that they're a person of interest. I mean, I don't know the politicalness of all that and, like, if that would be bad to put out, but...
No, but I mean, nowadays it's easy enough to find somebody to talk to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I just, I feel like there needs to be something. There hasn't been anything on this case in a while. Like, 2016 was the last real, news publication about the case, and
they came up with pretty much nothing.
Yeah.
So,
like, what now? What are we going to do now to try and solve this case?
Yeah, and Ingraham is getting up there in age. Who knows? Maybe he's getting to the point where he's just going to start blurting out what he thinks.
It's very possible. Who knows? Who knows? But he has not given up, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it'd be nice. Maybe he can get some closure, because it's a case that he's worked for so long.
Absolutely, yeah. He's pretty much been on it since 2 years in, and it's 27 years for him.
Yeah.
It's a long time.
Long time.
Sandra Sollie, her dog, and her unborn child, Brandon Michael, have been missing for 29 years. Her parents both passed away without knowing what happened to their daughter. But there are still loved ones of Sandra's that are fighting for answers, and they deserve to be able to give her a proper burial. There has to be someone out there that knows what took place all those years ago and can move this investigation forward. Before we finish up, I want to read a quote from you from the PI who has been dogged in his search for answers since 1996. And I want to make all those listening aware that he will not give up searching for Sandra. He said he will keep at it until the day he solves the case or the day he dies. He wants the person responsible to know, quote, "I don't want this person, who I believe is responsible. I don't want them to feel comfortable, ever. I want them to know I'll always be watching them and will always be looking." If you have any information about the disappearance of Sandra Sollie or know where her remains might be located, please contact the New York State Police at 585-398-4100 or private investigator Richard Ingraham at 585-465-8769. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at Wicked Deeds Pod and on Twitter at Wicked Deeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.